I'm Vanessa Murphree. I'm an associate professor at the University of Southern Mississippi. My book is called The Selling of Civil Rights, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the Use of Public Relations. So the book started out about 16 years ago as my dissertation at the University of Southern Mississippi. I was doing a paper project for a class there, and our assignment was to look at the 1964 Mississippi Freedom Summer. And most of the students elected to look at media coverage of that event from different sort of publications, for instance, the Black Press, the New York Times, Newsweek. But I knew I wanted to look at public relations history, so I thought I would look at the public relations behind the particular event, Freedom Summer. I really didn't know what I would find. I didn't know what was out there at that time. I didn't know anything about Freedom Summer and very little about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. But as I began just prowling around the archives at USM, Southern Mississippi, and the library, I was fortunate enough to find that our library owned the microfilm collection of the SNCC papers. And I think they had just purchased it at that time, and I think I was the first person to look at that particular microfilm collection. So when I looked at the guide to the microfilm, there were 72 reels. I opened up the guide and I saw that all the headings were public relations oriented. So we had press releases, we had photography, we had special events, we had fundraising, had media relations, all kinds of media clips and things like that. So I knew I certainly had a paper for the class. And then as I dug into that even further, it became very obvious to me that public relations was the central tool that propelled the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and helped them achieve many of their goals. Now, of course, their primary goal was achieving civil rights in the South, but in order to do that, they needed tools, and public relations was the central tool that propelled them forward. It helped them raise awareness about all the issues that were going on. It helped them change attitudes slowly but surely in the South and, of course, in the North. It helped them educate people, let them know what was going on. It helped them get their message out, and then ultimately it changed a lot of behaviors. We got thousands of people registered to vote in the South. We had new legislation. We had people marching, people standing up for civil rights who had not been doing that prior to these SNCC efforts. So the book is kind of spread out through the decade of the 1960s. SNCC was born April 1960, and at that time the group was primarily focused on nonviolent tactics. They often refer to themselves as the beloved community, and the primary tactics were sit-ins, marches, and things like that. And they were very successful with this, particularly with the sit-ins. Within a year, the sit-ins had resulted in the integration of several hundred lunch counters. They focused on corporate lunch counters, Woolworths in particular, Crest, and once Woolworths agreed to integrate one lunch counter, the whole corporate set was integrated. So that was really highly effective. And then, but from there, they realized they needed to really get into politics. So as early as 1961, 1962, they began to broaden their efforts and get into voter registration and politics. And public relations was very central to that, as it was to the sit-ins. The sit-ins were televised. They sent press releases about the sit-ins. They notified the media about what was going on, and that was very central to that success. And they carried those same tools over to the political activism stage with organizing, sending press releases, letting the media know what was going on, designing events that would attract the media attention, attract particularly national media attention. The local media in Mississippi, Alabama, in the Southeast was not particularly interested in this story, but they did get the attention of the national media. And in the voter registration stage, the thing that makes SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, different from, say, the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that Martin Luther King led was that they were a grassroots group. And they were all about getting into the field and empowering local people. So they were in communities in Albany, Georgia. They were in Lowndes County, Alabama. They were all throughout small communities in Mississippi, and getting those people registered to vote and getting them on political tickets. And that was very tremendous, and it was very brave. It was a dangerous thing for them to do. But all throughout this, they were working on engaging the media, raising awareness, using public relations to let people know what was going on, changing attitudes, educating, and ultimately changing those behaviors. And then toward the end of the decade, the 1960s, they moved into the Black Power stage. And this was quite of a turnaround from the nonviolence that they had been promoting before this. At this time, a lot of the original members had left the group, had moved on, and they had new leadership coming on. People were tired, people were exasperated. They were making progress, but it was slow, difficult, dangerous progress. And when they moved into the Black Power phase, it was more of a embracing the Black culture, and with that came some separatism. There was this feeling that we can't succeed with white communities, so we're going to withdraw and we're going to work on our own. And although this was not, it was very different, and you wouldn't necessarily consider it successful in traditional methods, they were quite successful in empowering Black people and embracing the Black culture, and in developing this notion that the Black culture was important and it was essential to look at who you are and where you came from. And all of these messages came from public relations, internal public relations sources as well, even though it was different people. In fact, Stokely Carmichael, who was the chairman at this time, went on Meet the Press and was very effective, to the point where some of the other commentators called him public relations man par excellence. He was very articulate. Television had gotten very popular at this time, and the media really just sort of adored him. But he also had a frightening message, which I think attracted the media too, and that wasn't violence as it's often interpreted to be, but rather it was self-defense. It's like we're not violent people, but if we face violence, we will respond accordingly. And then from there, they moved on to a new chairman who did support violence, H. Rap Brown. He's famous for the phrase, violence is as American as cherry pie. And of course, that was not received well by anyone, and the group kind of fizzled out by the end of the 1970s. But throughout all this, they met tremendous success, particularly with media relations, getting the national media involved. There were over 1,000 articles in the New York Times alone about SNCC and about their efforts, for example, and of course lots of magazine and other newspaper articles. And then empowering the people in these communities. They had the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which went to Atlantic City and represented there. They were on national television, and also the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which did not succeed when they first started out, but by 1970, Lowndes County, Alabama did have Black representation. A county that was 80% Black, that had never had a Black elected official, had Black representation by 1970, thanks to the Lowndes County Freedom Organization that SNCC sponsored. And when you go through the SNCC papers, these 82 reels of microfilm, and you look, for example, the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, you'll see brochures, you'll see press releases. That particular organization was really interesting because they came up with the Black Panther symbol that the Black Panther Party is known for. But in fact, they were never the Black Panther Party. When that organization dissolved, the Black Panther Party adopted that panther. But the reason that they chose that panther was it was a powerful symbol, but the white Democratic Party had a white rooster for their symbol, And a lot of people in Lowndes County couldn't read, had never had opportunities to go to school because they were so poor and they worked as sharecroppers. But by using that symbol, they were able to say, you know, we're a powerful people. And when they went into the election booth, they could see that Black Panther and know this is who I'm going to vote for. And the Panther was used on other symbols. At that time, the Alabama Democratic Party's slogan was white supremacy for the right above their white rooster. And contrasting that with the Black Panther symbol gave the people in Lowndes County just a tremendous presence and a tremendous sense of community and a feeling that they would have power. They also designed educational materials in the form of comic books to help people understand the importance of voting, to help people understand why they needed to vote and what was going on there. And all this time, SNCC was out in the field, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, North Carolina. They had a main office, and that main office was in Atlanta, Georgia. When the group was founded in 1960, Ella Jo Baker was working for the SCLC, and their office was there in Atlanta with Martin Luther King Jr. And Ella Jo Baker gathered the students who had started the sit-in movement and formed this organization. She hired Jane Stembridge, one person, to be the secretary, and Jane Stembridge worked there 1960 to 61 in Atlanta. And from there, as the years went on, we had different executive secretaries, and we began to get a communication staff in 1962, and Julian Bond was the communications director, and his office was there in Atlanta. And that was the headquarters, and they were sending out messages to the field, letting the field workers know how to write a press release, how to record the information, how to talk to the media, how to design talking points, how to do speeches. And all that was coming from that central office right there in Atlanta. Julian Bond had two people working for him, Dorothy Zellner and also Mary King. And all three of these people, they were quite young, in their very early 20s, but they had all worked for their student newspapers. Julian Bond had done an internship with Newsweek and with a newspaper there in Atlanta. And so even at a very young age, he had a strong understanding of public relations and media relations. And so through him and the staff that worked there, this sense they got the message out and just sort of served as a communications command center for all these people that were working out in the field who didn't have this education, who didn't have this knowledge. They printed out communication workbooks, how to design a press release, how to take a good picture, how to give a good speech, how to write a good caption. Constantly, they were training people in very primitive ways, as we would think of today, but it was effective in letting these young student workers know how to get their message across and know how to communicate with the national media.